How's everybody doing today? Thank you so much for coming to Hackfort 2021. I hope you guys are also enjoying Treefort. It feels so good to be back. I am super excited about this next panel. Some great friends, colleagues. But yeah, anyways, without further ado, I'm just gonna hand it over to Greg here, and you guys have fun, all right? Don't bite, all right?
I think I'll be all right. Hi, everybody. I'll sit so I can see everyone. I literally just biked here as fast as I could and ran here, so I'm going to introduce these guys and let them get going real quick. But you've got three folks here who are really engaged in Idaho politics, and in different ways. Kind of similar, probably some similar views up here and similar outcomes that they intend, but they're approaching it in wildly different ways, and I think it's going to be a really interesting conversation. I'm sorry that I'm like really out of breath. I wish you'd have talked longer introduction.
You know, I feel like, Greg, I think it's like, it's Treefort. You got places to go, people to see.
I know, yeah.
I'm proud of you. I do a lot of running too, so
I'm
I get
alive.
it.
I'm here. Yeah, so at any rate, so here we are with these guys. So I'm going to ask them all to sort of introduce kind of themselves in a little bit more detail and talk about what they think that is broken, really, about Idaho politics. I mean, that's kind of the beginning. What's broken, and what are they in their organization doing to fix it? And to my immediate left here is Luke Mayville, been really involved in Reclaim Idaho, a lot of the initiative approaches, that have moved the needle in the state. Raylan Flores, who is with Idaho Conservation Voters, they take a really hard look at local communities and how to move people up through the system and really start at the grassroots level and go from there. And Melanie Falwell, who one day said, man, I don't really like where everything's going. I'm going to do something about it, and changed everything about her career and her outlook. So it's been pretty incredible to watch. So that said, I'm going to get out of the way and maybe just kick it over to Luke here to start this conversation about, okay, what's broken? And you guys ask me questions, we'll ask them questions, and we'll fly through this.
Okay, thank you so much, Greg. Thank you all so much for being here.
No one look at me for like the next 5 minutes.
Yeah, I'll take it over. So, a lot of people know our organization, Reclaim Idaho, from ballot initiatives. We started in North Idaho. Shout out to Sandpoint. I know there's a lot of Sandpoint people putting on Hackfort, including Sean Wakely. We started in Sandpoint, where I'm from, and we painted this camper bright green and started going around the state. Eventually launched a Medicaid expansion ballot initiative, and bunch of other organizations joined in as a coalition. We got it on the ballot. It won with 61% of the vote. And and the real applause line should have been that there are now over 100,000 Idahoans who are covered with health care because of that initiative. So we've become better known in Idaho through the initiative process. We've also worked really hard to defend the initiative process, because after we passed Medicaid expansion, the legislature that had failed to do anything about the problem for over 6 years, the majority in the legislature, I should say, they really lashed out against us, and they went after the initiative process itself. And that culminated a couple months ago with them actually passing a law that basically gutted the initiative process. It killed the process. And together, actually, with Conservation Voters of Idaho, and Raylan was involved in this effort as well, a lot of us, fought back against this new law. Our organization joined together with another organization, filed a lawsuit asking the Idaho Supreme Court to strike down that law. About a month ago, the Idaho Supreme Court struck down that law, and now the initiative process is protected. And we are currently, and I want to get to what's broken about Idaho politics, but our big theme is initiatives, and our next initiative is to increase funding for public education. And I hope that everyone here will sign the initiative over here on the corner after we wrap up if you haven't signed it yet, and there's also going to be opportunities to volunteer. But here's what I want to say. What we've come to believe over the course of waging these campaigns is that our long-term goal isn't passing initiatives. That is a very worthy goal, and we feel like we've done a great deal of good through that. But our long-term goal is to really use the initiative process as a tool to get people organized. And that's what essentially, from our point of view, is broken about Idaho politics. And I don't want to claim there's one thing broken. I think that would be a huge understatement. But the broken part that we're working on is that people aren't organized enough specifically around issues of what you could call basic bread and butter economic justice. Things like, when you get sick, can you afford to go see a doctor? Or do you have to put off life-saving treatment because you can't afford it? Even if you're a family working paycheck to paycheck, can you still send your kid to a pretty good school? Those are the kinds of issues that where the majority of Idaho, we strongly believe, are on our side. But the problem is our political system does not reflect that, and that's for a lot of reasons. But one reason is there just aren't enough people who are organized. And I'll just wrap up my comment right now by just saying a little bit more about what we've come to understand by organized. What does it mean to be organized? It essentially means that large numbers of people are actively engaged in the political process. They have the capacities, the skills to engage in politics and to advocate around these issues that we're talking about. They have the camaraderie with one another. They've built relationships in their community with like-minded people who also are committed to these things. And maybe most of all, they are inspired and committed to act. And that's the kind of active citizen that we need, and we need thousands more of them. And what we've come to believe is that the initiative process is an extremely powerful tool for bringing that kind of citizen into being, on a large scale. There's a phrase that I really like that some organizers throw around. If you want to build a big movement, pick a big fight. If you want to build a big movement, pick a big fight. And I think that also applies to what we're talking about. If you want to activate large numbers of people, you should pick big fights. And the initiative process is perfect for that because it allows us to really motivate people with something that's actually winnable, something where they can see themselves making a difference. And that's what motivates them to get involved in the political process. We've had a lot of success in that. So what's broken, at least one part of it, not enough people organized. We're leveraging this initiative process around these basic economic bread and butter issues in order to get a whole lot more people organized. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks, Luke. And you know what Luke mentions is a really important part of when we talk about shaping the political future and navigating Idaho's politics. Is the initiatives, what he means is a way in which everyday Idahoans have an opportunity to navigate and put forth a vote on issues that we care about. And the reason why that's so important is because Idaho's political environment is so heavily dominated by conservatives, in a way in which, there's 105 elected officials at the State House, 17 of them are Democrat, which means we don't have policymaking spaces in which that there is an opportunity to discuss ideas around education and healthcare and the environment. Currently in Idaho, we have ideologues that are shaping and holding the legislative agenda hostage. So my name's Rielyn Flores, and I'm the Executive Director at Conservation Voters for Idaho. We are actually a pretty unique organization in the environmental movement here because we have a family of organizations in which we try to both advance conservation policy and voting rights here in Idaho, and it's both in a 501c3 civic engagement space. How do we build a more resilient Idaho? Sort of what Luke was talking about. How do we get people organized and checked in about the issues and how people are voting about the issues that impact their lives? And how do we help build future leaders that can help start shaping and moving local decisions, whether it's at the city level, county level, or at the state level? And then we have a 501c4, which is a tax status, but it means that we have a little bit more political muscle to do advocacy on our issues, and we get to endorse candidates. So when we start talking about getting people engaged and what does it look like to care about the issues here, we want them to also know which folks who are running for office that represent their issues. So we have an opportunity to leverage conservation, which is an issue that resonates across the political spectrum. People in rural and urban Idaho deeply care about our landscape, our air, and our water. And it's a way in which we can find common ground and help people better understand who's voting on common sense policy amongst their issues across parties, so we can navigate both defensive and proactive policy in many different spaces. And in addition to being able to endorse candidates so that people better understand who might represent their values, we also do the political work. So we engage in electoral campaigns through our political action committees to help those candidates that we've identified win office so that we can create the political environment to protect the natural environment. And then we partner with them once they win office to help push and advance conservation values. And I will tell you, CVI is 15 years now. We're a state affiliate of the League of Conservation Voters, which is a national partner that works at the federal level, but we have a lot of autonomy the way which we do stuff because of our political environment is so unique, where you're trying to advance conservation and environmental policy, that we have been engaging in political work across both in Republican primaries and in general elections since 2010. So we find folks who care deeply about public lands and access to clean water and outdoor recreation, who live in Grangeville, who live in Sandpoint, who live in Burley, and help them navigate a really tough, closed primary system. And that's where I'm getting to the ways in which the reason why all of this work is so important, and our theory of change is both the civic engagement and the electoral work and the accountability externally, is because in Idaho in 2010, the Republican Party closed their primary elections, which means in a district of about 42,000, we have 34 legislative districts in Idaho. And each district, back in the day, it's going to be redrawn now currently. If you're not involved in the redistricting process, you should. But each district's about 42,000 people. But the closed primary might have 4,000 people that vote. And in a state like Idaho, where the majority of Idahoans identify as Republican culturally, the person who wins in May, 80% of the time, is winning in November. So 4,000 people are getting to elect the person that represents and shapes policy for 42,000 people. And therefore, the ways in which you get to push and help people who care about conservation or voting rights or health care, we have to support them through a very tight primary electorate where extremism has creeped in, they're very active, and they are shaping the outcomes of those primary elections. And that's where you see, last legislative session, one of the worst legislative sessions in Idaho history, where the far right takes over a chamber, and then we can't pass a K through 12 education budget. The Meals on Wheels budget is voted down. Idaho Public Television budget is voted down. These are just the basic functions of government. These aren't controversial issues. We have ways in which our political system here in Idaho has been taken over by extremists and ideologues, and we have to engage and better understand the process and mobilize people both in local elections and help them see the values and the issues that they care about and how they're impacted through a system that's really hard to access. So it's year-round education, year-round mobilization. I'm really proud in the last 5 years we've done a lot of work to stabilize our field program. Electoral work you normally see start and stop around election cycles. We have a year-round voter education team that is calling voters 5 days a week, every week. So we know what people care about. We let them know what's happening at their city council, at their county commission, at the state house. Let them know how to get involved, know what issues matter to them, and how do they think things are going right now so that we can better understand a more resilient electorate where we can start changing Idaho's politics. But it's about there's some short-term wins in primary elections, but it's a long-term vision for building power in Idaho. And we have to be consistent, and we have to listen, and we have to be committed to doing this work through some really tough years like this last year.
Hi, my name is Melanie Falwell. I'm a little confused about the name of this panel. Seems like things are going pretty well, pretty chill here in Idaho. So I am a co-founder and partner in a political firm here in Boise called the Scrap Shop. We focus on running the campaigns of candidates that we believe share our values, are committed to the things that we're committed to, and advance good policy that will make the lives of Idahoans better. That's why we're in the game. I'm a lifelong Idahoan. I was born here. I was raised in Caldwell, and my family of origin is Republican. I grew up around a lot of very conservative people, farmers and fruit ranchers and just regular people. And I can say that the tone and temperature of things here in Idaho have definitely changed. I think for all of us who have been here a while, feel that acutely. And I think that what we're experiencing and what is broken isn't necessarily an Idaho-specific thing at all. I do think this is part of a national malaise, a national sickness. I will say that the Idaho patient is presenting very acutely. I think that we have got a really acute case of the disease that is plaguing us nationally. And it does speak to a brokenness that needs fixing. I think it's a big problem, a systemic problem. And like Rhiannon alluded to, there are big, systemic, holistic kind of things that need to happen, but meanwhile, we're bleeding out on the table, right? We've got some very acute problems in Idaho, open wounds that need tending before we can get to some of these larger issues. So one of the things that the Scrap Shop tries to do is run campaigns in Idaho, really professionalize running campaigns in Idaho while keeping a very grassroots flavor, a very scrappy in our name, sort of demeanor about things. We're really proud to have worked with some really exceptional candidates and electing them to office, often for like the first time. I mean, we were very proud to have recently help get elected, the first Black man to our state house, Representative Chris Mathias, who stood and gave which, pretty outrageous. That was the first time a Black man had been elected to that body, but I feel like that says a lot. Who was able to stand and give completely different testimony to this problem, this cultural boogeyman of CRT that we saw in the last session that I think is a really acute symptom of this national malaise. There are factions among us who have a very sincere profit motive to keep us constantly distracted and divided around non-issues, so that we can't talk about the kind of things that are actually broadly popular. The dirty secret of the American electorate is that our feelings on economic policies are left of center. If you look at any polling data, America is left of center on issues about healthcare and education and economic justice. Where it gets really sticky and where one party has made a lot of hay is appealing to people's sense of who those benefits should go to. It's that classic problem of the othering. And I feel like that's just so acute here in Idaho. If we can demand that some people don't get access to those good things we're talking about, if we can feel like we get less if someone else gets more, then you can keep the people divided, you can keep a people electing and voting for politicians who demonstrably do not share their best interests. So that's broadly what's broken, and I'm sure we're going to talk about fixing it now. Greg, are you feeling better?
Yeah, thank you. You guys did a nice job talking just long enough that I survived. Thank you. So start thinking about your questions, but I'm going to start, there's an elephant in the room probably. Okay, polling, blah, 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 values, all that. You look at the numbers, look at the raw numbers, right? Walk us through the difference between looking at that and saying, oh, it's just when you're in the minority, it sucks and you've got to find other ways to convince it. And what is out there that says, okay, no, this will be a two-part question. Maybe hit us just separate from all what you're saying, because some of you guys mentioned it already. What are the points that you can say, okay, look here, look here, look here. This is why the political structure is not representing the true voice. Does that make sense? And you say you can come forward with education, and someone who might be who's voted for Trump might sign this education initiative, even though none of the people they would vote for would reflect that value.
Right. So let me give an example of that. We've been circulating this petition to increase funding for education. It does so by restoring the corporate income tax rate to what it used to be and by creating a new tax bracket just on married couples making over $500,000 a year and individuals making over $250,000 a year. And we've been circulating it for about, 2 or 3 months now, and getting a great reception for it in every region of the state. We were at Paul Bunyan Days a couple weeks ago in St. Mary's, and it was, there were Trump hats everywhere, but we pretty quickly found that that wasn't even a reason not to talk to someone, because they were pretty much just as likely to sign our initiative. But here's what I want to get to. Over and over again, we've heard people say, you go up to them, you say, will you sign the petition to get more funding for Idaho public schools? And they don't always say this, but many, many times they'll say, does this have something to do with that CRT? And our answer is, oh no, this doesn't have anything to do with the curriculum. This is just getting more funding for the basics, things like teacher salaries, programs that are underfunded. Will you sign it? Almost every time they sign it. So here's an instance of a person with a kind of divided mind, or maybe they don't even think of it as divided. They're mad at the schools because of this boogeyman, as we talked about, and they still want to support the schools with better funding, and they still want teachers to get a raise. And here's one way to diagnose the way, that might not be a problem for our initiative. If we're good enough at organizing, if we're good enough at getting our message out, that same group of people will all go and vote for the initiative and will win, and it will be amazing. But it speaks to a long-term problem that will continue to plague our state when that person goes to the voting booth and decides which candidate to vote for. Because I'm guessing that they will go, and if they're thinking about education in the voting booth, they're not going to think about the funding problem when they think about a candidate. They're going to think about the CRT problem. And they're going to say, oh, whether it's in the Republican primary and thinking about the better candidate on education, or whether it's between a Republican and a Democrat and thinking about the better candidate on education, they're going to say, they're going to tend to say, oh, I'm going to go with the more right-wing candidate because they're, or whatever, however you want to describe it, because they're the ones standing up against CRT. So the challenge, how do we change that mindset? How do we get people to actually think about not have CRT at the top of their mind, but instead have at the top of their mind the fact that all across Idaho right now, there are districts that are closing for weeks at a time because they can't hire enough teachers and support staff. They're actually closing. And it's part of it's COVID, but it's not all COVID. So that's the only answer that we have right now, at least as an organization, is one part of it. You've got to get more people locally in the community who are talking about the funding issue, talking about that side of it, because that can start to change the political culture bit by bit. It can change the conversation, and that might not be satisfying, but that's the day-to-day work that we're grinding away at.
I'll add that, the reason why it's so hard to win on our issues is when you think about the amount of registered voters in the state, which I hope all of you are, quick plug, is that only 13% of all registered voters in the state of Idaho are registered Democrats. So when we talk about people voting and when they're showing up and how we're going to change the politics, it can't be about partisanship in this state. It has to be about the issues. It has to be about education. It has to be about the outdoors and quality of life and public lands and water and housing and the issues that touch everyday Idahoans, right? And the thing is that the national politics, the divide in national politics, are the reason why when you go to a small community and you ask about education, they talk about CRT. Because we've got groups on the ground here in Idaho who are pushing that level of paranoia throughout their communication systems, and they are very active, and they're really good at this. Let's not undermine. It's not. I know a lot of the times in our frustration, we can be like, "Oh, they're so stupid. I can't." They're really good at this, and they're winning. And we have to get closer to community, and we have to understand what's happening in St. Mary's and in Idaho Falls and in Caldwell. And we have to understand what issues matter to those families and how do they get involved on those issues, and better understand that it isn't being the spoon-fed CRT boogeyman, but it is about what is happening in their own backyard. And so that's when you're talking about, like, how do you make a difference in the scene? It's that you have to get closer to community, you have to understand their issues, and you have to be consistent in engaging them, right? When we think about, let's say, public lands issues, we've grown a public lands list of over 30,000 statewide who deeply care. And I will tell you, amongst those 30,000, they are very different people, right? We had a public lands rally at the State House that had 3,000 people on it, and you had like multi-5-year generation Idahoans who were sportsmen. You had young families living in urban areas that love public lands because the way it mitigates climate change, right? There's many reasons why people come to our issues and the things that they care about, but they're never on the same team party-wise. So when you think about how we strengthen our issue and then hold accountability on it and make sure that they know who's actually voting which way, that's the work that we do to start changing Idaho politics. And until then, we have to start really talking about what does it look like to be engaged in local elections, right? We think about the State House, we think about the federal level policy, but I'll tell you, some of the boldest policies that are protecting our families are happening in city councils. And city council elections, so far, are nonpartisan. So we can talk to communities about issues that matter and find leadership. And I will tell you, the last 4 years, the last 18 months, local leadership has mattered when it comes to public health and then when it comes to statewide policy on the issues we care about. So a lot of folks that you know, your friends, your cousins, your neighbors, know about presidential elections, they know about national politics, but they rarely know who represents them on city council. They rarely know the 3 folks that are sitting at the State House that are voting on issues. And sometimes it's just not cool to talk about that stuff, but it is cool to have access to health care. And it is cool to be able to send your kids to a school that's not falling down. And it is cool to think about to save our landscapes for the next generation. So be the person that steps into spaces and talks about the things that are affecting your families and get closer to people and remind them in the way in which the power is ours to make that change. It is on us to make that change.
Strongly second that. Strongly second that idea of that we are far more empowered than we think. I think when we get into the scarcity mindset of, oh, there's so few of us and we can't make anything happen and everything's terrible, and we listen to that deluge of national news, which is very powerful and very depressing, the same national outfits and apertures that are making it possible to have billions of dollars of propaganda pumped into the ears of the citizenry here, which there is never going to be a slogan or a video or a brand campaign that's going to change that here at Idaho. We're not going to all of a sudden remake people's idea of what it means to be an Idaho Democrat or an Idaho progressive. That is a lost cause because we can't compete with the 7 figures, 8, huge amounts of money that go into Idaho every year to tell people what to think. We can't compete with that, but what can we do? And I think both Luke and Reel-In get right at that. We can talk to people. We can have conversations. It's really easy to hate somebody as a disembodied idea. It's really easy to hate somebody in abstract. It's really easy to believe that somebody is a witch and we should burn her, and that somebody's got horns, and everything is terrible, and everybody's a secret commie Marxist, and they're all coming to ruin your life and take your stuff and teach your kids things you don't like. That's a very simple task. It's a lot harder to hate a flesh and blood person across a table, or across a front yard, or across a plate of food. Now, are there some people that we really can't reach that way? Absolutely. But there's a whole lot of normals we can. Everybody up on this stage and probably most people in the audience are not normals. Like, we probably think and know a lot more about politics than the average person.
When you vote on favorite panelist, remember who called you that.
You weirdos. No, I mean, we always think about that. Normal people do not have the bandwidth to attenuate to who their 3 representatives are in the State House, who their representatives are in DC, now which city council district they're in, and like most normal people don't know this. Don't tell elected officials that. That always hurts their feelings. But normal people don't know this. So we have to think about those ways that we can break through in relationship, be in service to people, be in conversation with people, and bit by bit, voter by voter, foot over foot, start to change the landscape. It certainly doesn't happen by not talking. Nothing gets better when we don't talk. And I think Reclaim is a testament to that. I think CVI's work is a testament to that. And I think our own campaigns are a testament to that. When we talk to people, when we can have nuanced conversations about the issues that impact people's lives, we can win the day. And it does gonna happen in unsexy things like nonpartisan city races or highway districts. Nobody cares about highway districts, but highway districts are a nonpartisan race that impact your life every day here in Ada County. But you know, I'm sure that most of us could not name who makes up that commission. All the nerds on this stage probably can, but it's not sexy, it's not fun, it's not a punchy viral video with like a fighter jet and a slogan and a bunch of other bullshit, but it's what wins the day. And it's slow, it's unsexy, but it really, folks, is all we have.
And now, thank you. I changed masks not because I don't want you to vote, but because it was really muffling my voice, I thought. So
Greg's depressed and he's not voting
I'm in
anymore.
my Treat Fort mask now. So Treat Fort, do that and then vote. Okay, so I want to I'm going to open this up in a sec, so I hope you're thinking about your questions. But, you know, we tend to look at the world in this sort of, you know, certainly politics is now it's Democrat-Republican. It's a two-party system that, you know, arguably that some would say is part of the problem. But what is the outcome you're looking for? It's not, are you, and this is, again, this is not, you know, I'm on the board of the city club. We would, you know, we tend to have our conversations across and try to bring everybody in. This is a targeted group of folks who are probably all going to vote for the same handful of people at the next election. I'll just say that, and I'm included in there, right? But that doesn't mean that you can't kind of, you know, learn, you know, kind of expand out and use this, even if you don't agree with the folks who happen to be sitting up here about how to think through Idaho politics. I just want to get that, it's just the moderator in me who wants to kind of get that off my chest. So, but what are you guys talking, is a Republican going to lose in a legislative district in Marsing? Is that the goal? Is it, you know, somebody who's running as a Republican in a really conservative district has experience like maybe they used to in the city council or the local highway district? I'll ask another question about that in a sec, because I really think that social media has drastically changed the qualifications for candidacy. So talk a little bit about, and you guys have all hinted at it, but really put a point on it. What are we doing here?
I'll hop in on the political stuff because we've been engaging in those real deep investments in the political work for a little bit, right? So we put money into Republican primaries. We endorse Republicans so that we can navigate who's going to actually shape policy at the State House. That's hard, but it's necessary, right? And to do that work, we have to help them navigate a really tough, closed primary. And how do they be folks who aren't getting into government to dismantle it, which we're seeing from extremists, right, and to advance an ideological agenda, but how do they actually run on transportation and housing and education and do that in a conservative way? And I will name that work a lot of times looks like, for us in our theory of change, right, it's we're raising the floor of what's the bottom, right? We're going both. We're raising the floor of what's the bottom of who's going to determine both environmental policy, but reproductive health and education, and you know, across the issues that they navigate at the State House. And we're trying to build a more resilient movement. So we're also working with impacted communities and folks who don't always vote all the time to better understand the power that they have, and building leaders within those communities so that we can start shaping the future where it's not just about raising the floor, but it's about making sure that everyone has an opportunity to advance more common sense policy from city council, county to the State House. And it's hard work. Since the last 10 years, we've won 22 races in Republican primaries. Right, so I'll name the elephant in the room. We endorsed Brad Little in 2018 against Raul Labrador. It's not to say that it's not been tough the last year and a half, but it's also, Raul Labrador is not our governor right now, right? But to think about who can be the governor of Idaho in the future, we have to have a more resilient electorate across all of our communities across the state that actually understand education policy, that understand housing policy, that understand policy around outdoor recreation and public lands, and they start strengthening those issues so that we can win across party. So first we have to make the party better, and then we have to strengthen our issues to win across party. And that's how we build a future where it's not just lifting very heavily at the bottom, but also actually having something to hope for. That it is people in this room that can have more brighter, comprehensive conversations about public policy in Idaho. But it is a long-term game. This isn't going to happen soon, but it can happen for Idaho, and it's through conversations.
Luke, once you get, you go through a few of these, you do the Reclaim Idaho, the initial, the healthcare initiative, the education initiative, people start to be connected, and then what? That's the question. Is that experience? Are you creating people who are just engaged in the process, or where do you see that going?
Well, it's such an important question because I love Rieland's metaphor of lifting the floor. With these one-off initiatives, if you design them in the right way, they can really, lift the floor up quite a bit on a given, on the issue of healthcare, for example, Medicaid expansion really brought up the floor pretty high compared to where it used to be, and just changed the whole dynamic in the legislature when it came to that issue. But that's only one policy. And we've got about, people remind me a lot, there are about 30 urgent things that need action immediately. So this question of what beyond these one-off initiatives and what's really the fruit of this longer-term organizing. I'll give one example that has inspired me. Probably on a kind of per capita level, if you look around the state, the place where we're most organized as an organization is where we started in Bonner County. That's just where the most people are involved compared to the larger population. And it has had an effect. I mean, we can't, it's not, I can't prove this. But there's a lot of indication, including from people on the ground, that the organizing that's been done there has had a big effect. Has it flipped any legislative seats from Republican to Democrat? Absolutely not. Not even close. But here's something that happened. In the last 2 cycles of local elections, they were able to keep people off of the library board who don't believe in libraries. They were able to keep people off the hospital board who don't believe in public health. They were able to keep people on the school board who believe in public education. They generally ran and they came together with people of all different political stripes in the community. And their campaign was, we're going to elect the qualified candidates. And you had prominent Republicans in the community repeating that same slogan, elect the qualified candidates. And that's, I hope that can be the seed of a larger change, but it's already making a big difference. And that's what we hope to see in more parts of the state we want to contribute to that.
Who's got a question? I'll come over here. Oh, you're gonna do? I just almost died getting off the stage. Now I'm gonna get back on the stage.
So, my name's Greg Olson. I have lived in Idaho most of my life. Actually, some of the members of Reclaim Idaho go to our church. I go to King of Glory Lutheran. But irrelevant, 350.org, Inclusive Idaho, United Vision Idaho, the EV clubs, Sierra Club, all these different groups I was part of Occupy Boise. Some of the best meetings we had was with Tea Party people. These groups, and I'm going to start with, I'm saying this with absolute care for the effort that you guys are doing, and I want you to do better, but nobody's networking. There are no common email lists where the United Vision people are talking to the old Occupy Boise people who are talking to the EV Club people or the Sierra Club people. I'm just not seeing it. And so like we had Northwest neighborhood is a neighborhood I'm in. It's now one of the largest neighborhoods in the Boise area. It could swing elections. Last year, during this startup of these different neighborhoods in Boise starting to divide, I asked your groups to contact these different neighborhoods to assist in the election, to try to help and or pick different people who are running for these different local offices. And I didn't see any of that. And so I'm wondering, why aren't we networking? Why aren't we talking to the people from United Vision Idaho or Inclusive Idaho or any of these other groups? Because there are people that are like-minded, like you have said. But I'm just not seeing the networking. So can you answer
guys
that?
want to jump in?
I will say the world is a small world, and Idaho is even smaller, right? We do work with the individuals within those groups, and I will tell you, most of the folks that might be in a CVI member is going to be a member of Sierra Club, is going to be a member of United Vision for Idaho, right? Like our community is pretty interconnected, but you're right in the ways in which we don't always coordinate strategy, but it's also because we can work in different ways, right? There are people who are engaged, or what sparks their civic engagement and what sparks them to get involved is a leader at United Vision for Idaho, right? And so it is hearing from them that helps them keep engaged in the work. And sometimes the folks are, been year-long members of Sierra Club and deeply care about those issues, and hearing from those messengers is super important. So it's okay to have the multiple vehicles for folks to plug into this work. And I will tell you, most of the leaders of those organizations do know each other, because we are all navigating a broader, tougher environment. Can our tools get better? Can the ways in which we think about campaigns, the things that we're doing is shared from the top? I would say we're not the top, but we are a funded organization, right? We do grassroots work, but there are grassroots groups that don't have budgets and staff. If there are ways that the work is coming from here to there and there to here, sure, there's definitely more room for that. I think part of the challenge is that we're all navigating the dumpster fires around us. Right? Our attention is divided amongst the many ways in which there's so much to do. And so how do we navigate what's here now to think about what we need to do to change the long term is a good question.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on that, I would say there's nobody on this stage that probably doesn't spend most of their every single workday and personal time networking with people. This is a people business. It's all relational. From the campaign standpoint, we are a field-based firm. We really pride ourselves on direct voter contact, taking all kinds of forms. And we specialize in talking to the electorate and talking to voters and being out. And we have volunteers. We have but we organize within communities to get what needs to be done for that candidate. So there's so much, though we are a small place, and I think definitely the activist class of people is a small one. There are a whole lot of other people that are engaged all the time in a lot of myriad ways that it looks a lot of different ways. My activism used to be centered around public schools advocacy and working in neighborhoods and working on energizing our neighborhoods, working on free public pre-K. Everybody is plugged into the things that they're really passionate about. And I don't think it's necessary that we be one constant, unified listserv. I don't think that necessarily gets people where they live and where they need at that moment. I think the activist class is able to do that, but I think normal Idahoans, on the whole, just aren't.
Let's jump in the back corner here real quick. Oh, sorry, over your head, sir. You mean?
Well, first, I'm really glad you guys organized this to begin with. I think there is a lot to fix in Idaho, and how to fix Idaho's broken politics is a important topic. My name is Amos Rothstein, and up until a month ago, I was the executive director of the Idaho Republican Party. And I am now with the Idaho Association of Commerce and Industry, which essentially serves as our state chamber of commerce. I've been all around the state. I've been to well over a majority of the counties. I've spoken to people on all aspects of our party, which represents 53% of the registered voters in the state, in the spectrum that they fall on. And overwhelmingly, they still stand with Brad Little. And there was a reason more. There's a loud minority. Obviously, we have to deal with them on all fronts, and they're obnoxious. But I will say that
We all want to go to a bar with you and hear the stories.
I'm around. I'll be at Nerlex later. So anyway, I will say there is a lot more we have in common. I will say I was a little dismayed not to see someone involved in center-right politics on this panel, when this is a state where a Democrat for president hasn't received over 40% of the vote since 1964. And 4-1 Republicans outnumber Democrats. It's going to take a coalition. It's going to take a lot of conversations with Republicans. And I can say from going around the state, there's a lot of them that are pissed off and that are very, very upset with the fringes of this state political spectrum right now. So with that, and I want to say also just very briefly on education and environment. I know I'm so glad you get involved in primaries to keep a lot of these crazy people out. But I will also say we talk about education on the right and on the conservative side. There's a reason that the Idaho Education Association endorsed Governor Little over Paulette Jordan. These are issues that we are talking about too. And when is there going to start being a more public and more visible presence, not just at Hackfort and Treefort, but around the state, of people who are on the Republican side to talk about these issues too? You'd be so shocked to see the amount of people that care very visibly about the issues that you're talking about. And when can we start making this happen?
I would just like to say a couple things. So first
Sure.
of all, every one of the people up here spends a lot of time talking to Republicans, like a lot, because we have to. As you just correctly identified, it is a reality, and we are all realists, navigating some very difficult waters. So we talk to Republicans, a lot of them. Now, I have found, in my experience, and in the varietal Republicans who sidle up to all of us and say, we got to do something about all the crazies, I have not seen a robust, visible, vocal, and courageous effort on the part of the Republicans to hold the crazies in their own party to account. What I actually see is a whole lot of haymaking and fundraising and stoking of the ideologue nonsense, the tinfoil hat garbage that held our state house. So respectfully, and I really appreciate your comment, I think that some of that has got to come from the Republican Party itself in a loud way, in a visible way, in a way that harkens back to the Idaho I grew up in and the Idaho I know a lot of us miss.
You pushed Melanie's button, I think, right there on that one. I do want to say, I'm going to plug City Club for a sec. We have a conversation actually coming up between Chuck Winder, who's in the Senate, and Raul Labrador about the future of the Republican Party, which is just taking on that. It's just those two folks talking that through. So I agree with you, and you heard me hedge at the beginning. Like, it's a little bit weird to be up here with, without, and here representing the other side is this. But I'm a firm believer in this sort of long, drawn-out civic conversation, and that you can't solve everything in every panel, and you can't surround every issue with every discussion. And so I appreciate you kind of chiming in on that, because I think it's pretty valuable to hear, and it makes me want to. You guys could respond to that, but also in the process, what is it? Is the movement going to come from people who believe a different thing about education, or people who believe a different thing about interacting with other human beings? And like, what's the middle? Where's the common ground? There's always going to be people disagreeing on the right approach. But but what we have now is not even a discussion about some of these things, right? That's kind of my 2 cents, but.
I'll speak to that quickly, and this is a point where I really want to give a shout out to the work Melanie and Scrap Shop are doing, because as Melanie said earlier, we're not going to see, the change isn't going to come by some dramatic rebranding of what it means to be an Idaho progressive or an Idaho Democrat. But one thing that you might have been implying by that I strongly believe is what you do see is really is compelling personalities in the form of strong candidates who go out there and build public will and build support, and they become the exceptional candidate who that voter will vote for, even if they won't vote for someone in their party. And I think that's, if you look back at the history of Idaho, even when we did have a more balanced political system, it was often the really compelling leaders. And that's part of what Scrap Shop is doing, is actually professionalizing these campaigns and making these candidates really strong, helping them become who they are and really strong candidates. And we hope with Reclaim Idaho that we're helping build the basis for that by like giving them more of an organized political base of active citizens who they can tap into. So that's my best answer.
I just want to say for the record too, I hope I didn't diminish Melanie's anger, because it's real and I feel it too, and we all feel it, and you feel it, right? There's something that is super frustrating about watching this system, and so I just, my inclination to make jokes is always greater than my inclination to be a decent human being. So
No, like,
sometimes I have to backtrack. We'll go to this guy here in a sec, but yeah.
for sure. I mean, I think that one of the things I think Luke's getting out really well is that because we are all, I would say, in spaces that have to navigate that political reality, it's tempting to just be angry. But I think the three of us spend a lot of time just doing, right? And hopefully building infrastructure and motivating people and getting people engaged so that they can build alongside and have those conversations that I think are absolutely essential to seeing one another's humanity. I chafe at this idea that it's the responsibility of the three of us on this stage to fix the Republican Party. That is not my job, nor I don't have the ability, because they wouldn't listen to me in a million years. So, it's that idea that we're all in this together, but there are some of us who need maybe to take some additional responsibility.
Could I squeeze in a comment on your question earlier? I find myself constantly torn because on the one hand, like in terms of the long-term outcomes of what we want, or like say the medium-term outcomes, every year we've got to pass a Medicaid budget. And in recent years, that has been like 2 or 3 votes in the Idaho House, and that's all up to Republicans, and they have been doing it actually. So in that sense, it's like, yes, we need to build those relationships and build those coalitions and do that work. But then, as part of an organization that has made great use of Idaho's constitutional right to put forward ballot initiatives, I watched while the Republican majority in the legislature put forward a law that gave Idaho by far the most extreme initiative rules in the nation. The Idaho Supreme Court eventually called it tyranny. They said it was a grave attack on the Constitution of Idaho. And how many Republicans in the Idaho Senate voted against that law? 2. And I think there were 5 in the House. So that law, if we wouldn't have succeeded in getting the Supreme Court to strike it down, it would have killed our entire organization, everything we're trying to do. It would have prevented future initiatives like Medicaid expansion from getting on the ballot. So it's hard. That's part of the dilemma you find yourself in when you're doing this kind of work. That you're trying to build coalitions with people while also just trying to stay alive. So that's what it is.
Respectfully, I want to say you guys kind of dodged my question. I'm not talking about listservs. Inclusive Idaho filled the Boise Capitol streets as far as you could see from the top people. Out of all the groups I listed, that's easily more than 10,000 people. Guys, it's not a listserv. It's when you have these meetings, it's not worrying about COVID, figuring out some kind of a mass COVID-safe meeting where you can do this with 350.org, United Vision, getting these people talking so that you're meeting your effort to get the people. We had
Sir, let's keep it quick, please. So yeah, we got a few. Yeah.
we had Tea Party people coming from North Idaho to talk to the occupied people here.
Right. When there is common ground, people find those connections. So how do you? Okay. Right. Yeah. Does anybody want to talk about that? I'll follow up with a super quick question. So what are we talking about? Are we talking about voter turnout? Are we talking about persuasion? Or are we talking about truly connecting over issues that exist right now that we kind of think about? I mean, where is the potential there?
All of it.
All of it?
It's all of it, right? It's so.
And that's why there's all these groups trying to do all these different things, right?
It is all of it. And I'll say, Amos is somebody that I do work with, right? And so I also just want to name that even though environmental issues can be seen as a progressive democratic issue, in Idaho, how we do this work, it's about conservation values of the electorate. And conservation values in Kamei are different than conservation values in District 17 of Boise. And that's okay, right? We're building those issues stronger that you care about them so that we can start getting people engaged and changing the state house so that we have spaces to talk about policy. But it's also about, finding ways in which that folks are staying connected. But what Melanie said earlier is also really true. We're in a time like no other. We are exhausted as working families. We are trying to navigate a system that is failing us, whether it's education or healthcare. We have a moment to get engaged and to leverage our voice and our power through the ballot box, and then we return to surviving a really challenging time. There are moments when we can find community that's really inspiring, and we think about both how we change in the near term and long term, but it's also something that's just really hard for the everyday Idahoan. So how do we get them prepared and mobilize them and let them know, all right, I know I see you, it is hard right now, but now's the time to go. And I'll get back to you when we can actually start pushing on the policy. That's the work that we're doing, because everyone's exhausted about how hard it is to make a difference in the state, whether you're Republican or Democrat. Yeah.
Let's get to here.
Good afternoon.
Thanks for your patience, sir. And I didn't even look over here. I apologize, guys.
Yeah.
You probably all had your hands up.
My name is John Hergert. Funny enough, 5 years ago, I was the interim pastor at King of Glory Lutheran Church. We are not all, but I also served on a school board in Pasco, Washington for 13 years. In Washington, they changed the law about primaries. I mean, we had to go through the court system, and it's a more open, it's a top two. Not my favorite, but you got to come up with something. Has any work been done in trying to change, that through a constitutional process or a legislative process isn't going to work, but so a court process to open up those primaries again that gets rid of those crazies a little earlier? And let's be honest, there's crazy on the left too. Yeah, there is. So, and I might be one of them. So, but I worked with some really
Crazy's
conservative
not always
people.
bad either, right?
Yeah.
Some of my best friends are crazy.
Yeah, I worked with some very conservative people in the state of Washington, in Pasco, Washington, and we got jobs done because we kept the focus on the children. And you have to find a way to do that. You have to have a hook somehow. So that's a little more than I wanted to say. That's a professional hazard.
Good question though on the primary system. Right now, it's up to the parties.
Yeah, so you've correctly identified that one of the things at the root of our problems is our closed primary system, that it rewards extremism. It rewards a very clean, pure adherence to a certain ideology. And then you have a minority group of voters, basically electing the elected official for the whole. So absolutely is it a problem. The mechanisms for doing that are a little complicated, but I will say that there is appetite to look at that. There's appetite to look at remedies like top two. like ranked choice. There are appetites and efforts in the mix right now working on that.
Awesome. Well, we're getting some time signals, but like, hold on, Luke's got
Oh,
some stuff
so
coming up.
actually, Greg, we're doing okay because Gabe, who's on next, he's the last guy for the day, and he's fine with waiting until you guys get through Q&A.
Thanks, Gabe.
Then we're literally in here until tomorrow. At
Okay,
like
maybe.
4.
Okay, I'm gonna regret.
I
Maybe I'm gonna
have
regret this.
music to see tonight, so let's just take this one step at a time. Yeah, let's go way down here and have some more questions. Let's do that. I'm gonna stand up.
I'm gonna run over here. Oh my God. I'll give you the mic.
Okay, my name's Sierra. I grew up in Twin Falls and now go to Boise State. My
Bruins.
question, or like, I guess fear. I had a friend ask me the other day that I hadn't seen him in 3 years, and he's like, "How has your worldview changed in the past 3 years?" And I said, "My politics and opinions are pretty much the same, but I've become a lot more pessimistic after seeing how we handled COVID, because I feel like a pandemic has like fairly simple answers, like wear a mask, get a vaccine, and we should be done with it." So my fear is that climate change is feeling really, really real right now. Like this summer was so hot, and last winter had like no snow. And I think getting out of climate change has like specifically in Idaho, like I think our biggest issue will probably be droughts. And I think the simple answer is to like limit our water use and be conservative with that. But I'm really scared that it's going to become political in that we are infringing on like personal freedoms when we put regulations on how much personal water use and corporate water use were allowed. So how, do you guys have any ideas? Maybe I'm like wrong in the solution, but I'm really scared that like, I don't know, how do we avoid it becoming like a personal freedom and like political issue to like water your lawn less, I guess?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And one that really, and you're not alone, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, there are studies after studies that show just the severe climate change related, depression and anxiety that's out there. Certainly among those the youngest folks, but they're hitting some of us who are about 52.
Right. Sierra, I want to thank you for your question, and I think you named that early off when you talked about your frustration with the response to the pandemic. That got really partisan, right? It was during a transition of administrations. It got wrapped up in the elections. It got really partisan. When the issues get partisan, solutions lose, right? And so for us, when we navigate our climate policy and our climate advocacy here in a place like Idaho, there are wins. I will tell you, it was a bright young Republican woman from Madison County who started the Clean Energy Caucus in the House. Right? We are when we had the very first hearing on climate change at the State House, we worked in partnership with INL and Simplot and climate scientists from Boise State University to talk about the impacts of a changing climate on Idaho and what we're doing to innovate to navigate some climate resiliency. A lot of that language I just used wasn't about human impact on the environment and what can we do ourselves, because we understand the lines of which our issue might get partisan more broadly statewide, and we find solutions in the spaces that meet our legislators, our community where they are, because we don't have time to entrench on the partisanship because of the urgency of climate. And on the other side of that coin, where we're working with Republicans to advance clean energy policy at the State House, we have an incredible mayor in the city of Boise who is not only leading on climate for our city, but I would say she's advancing bold climate.
She's not here anymore. So
I
you
know,
don't
she's
have
not
to
even
say
here
that.
to hear this.
She
It's
was
great.
here, but she was here a little bit.
She's advancing bold climate policy nationally, and that's a lot of the reason, the opportunity we got to see President Joe Biden last week come in and learn what Idahoans are doing, whether it's drought or wildfires or what our issues are. So we can fight for climate policy at the local level in a certain way, and then at the statewide level in a different way. But we can't put ourselves in one party or the other because then it's not quick enough and it's not bold enough, and we can't meet the moment that we must.
In a weird way, Idaho is probably better prepared for water decisions than a lot of other states. I mean, going through the Snake River Basin adjudication, right? The Snake River Plain and the aquifer underneath it has that's so far ahead of other states. California, our families, my wife's uncles were drilling for water like 2 years ago without, unpermitted, just see what's down there, grab it, and if you get it, pull out what you want, right? I mean, that's in the Central Valley, so that has stopped here. There's a lot of intention on that. And because there are so many rules about how you have to use your agricultural water, maybe one day down the road we'll be a little smarter about lawns and stuff, but that's a hard hit to do. But people have figured it out. Tucson has beautiful gravel lawns. Who has got some other questions? Yeah, back row here.
Well, I just raised my hand because I have a gravel lawn too.
Oh, gravel lawn. Yeah, gravel lawn guy. All right, question over here. Yeah, give it up for the gravel lawn, everybody. Yeah, right there.
Hi, so I have a question about the redistricting majority project that was done in 2010. This really showed that with a little outside money, there can be huge impacts of electing certain individuals at the state level that can have huge impacts at the federal level. It's like the juvie picks the varsity team in this country. So my question is are you aware of these kind of organizations trying to influence our state elections? And how do you see this for our current 2020 redistricting that will have big impacts for the next 10 years?
So redistricting, thank you. One of my favorite topics, ever present. So Idaho is actually fairly unique. Redistricting is a challenging thing that only happens once in every 10 years. It's super wonky. After the census, one person, one vote means we have to equally divide our legislative districts to ensure that the representatives from those districts play that out well. I will say in most places we hear about the gerrymandering that is being used to drastically disenfranchise voters, to drastically impact public policy. Idaho actually has the gold standard for redistricting. We have an independent citizens redistricting commission that is even numbered, which means no single political party has a say on the map. The map currently in Idaho, you've got 3 folks who are appointed by those within the Republican Party and 3 folks who are within the Democratic Party. It's the pro tem speaker and then the minority leaders in the House and Senate and party chairs. But that means a Republican or a Democrat has to agree on a map. It makes it much harder to have the influence of money and special interest in advancing an unfair map with districts that either disenfranchised impacted communities of color, in ways that you see in other states. And it also means that we get to have a say in that process. By statute, the Redistricting Commission, which is going on right now, it started September 1st, it's going around the state right now with public maps where people actually get to talk about and give input about where the political boundaries are and how politicians are going to represent them in their community into the future. And it is so accessible, but there are, again, it could be more accessible. It's in the middle of the day. And it's actually happened pretty quickly because the census data was super late, so now we have to do it really quickly before we get into the legislative session. So there are parts of it that it could be better, but overall we have something that is transparent and is more insulated from some of those special interest dollars and pressure. We had to fight for that. They actually tried to pass a constitutional amendment in 2019 to give the governor another addition to that commission, which made 7, which means the Democrats wouldn't have to be listened to at all. And we successfully fought against that in the State House on the basis of democracy and on the basis of this is something that Idaho does really well.
And I do, it's worth pointing out that not only did the Republicans not ultimately pass that, though they might still one day, they created, this was a it wasn't like everything was, split 50-50 back in the day and they decided to have a really great redistricting system. This was a dominant party that agreed to, it wasn't quite that simple. But yeah, there was a major step in doing this. I think the only thing more fair would be 6 people who have nothing to do with either party. Like that, if we could figure out that rule, then it would be even better.
But, like Reelan said, it's the gold standard. It exists in very few states, and in a lot of states, whoever controls the legislature controls the maps. Does that seem fair at all? No, absolutely not. So that is a real bright, shining light in Idaho politics of something that is equitable, that is fully bipartisan, and that is quite fair.
And I think personality-wise, it's set up to be a 4-2 vote. I'm not going to go into the personalities, but having covered these guys for a long time, that's my prediction. 1 Republican against, 1 Democrat against, and they'll go through. We'll see if I'm right.
That really would be like the goal too, right? When we talk about reforming the primaries, when we talk about opening primaries up, that idea that you've got to appeal to everybody. Right? Instead of just the most extreme people in your party, you got to bring some Democrats along with you. You've got to appeal to everyone. And I think that's the goal, that idea of that we've got to start, instead of just talking to the fringe, we've got to talk to the whole body electorate. And open primaries would really incentivize that. You could have policies that were more broadly popular and less partisan and extreme.
I think we're good. Yeah, you guys have been great. I know Luke wants to say something about tomorrow.
Yeah, I was going to bring it up, but he didn't, so.
Okay, well, there is an independently produced documentary that's making the rounds of film festivals on on the Medicaid expansion drive by Reclaim Idaho in 2018. It's called Reclaim Idaho, and it is at Filmfort this year. So tomorrow at the Flicks at 1:00, and then just after that at 2:45 at Trailhead. We're doing a workshop that's more like participatory. We're just kind of facilitating it. And by we, I mean myself and Cam Crow, who was here earlier, but snuck off. But we're doing a workshop on how to build a movement for change. So we're gonna talk about some of the principles that have really worked well for Reclaim Idaho, and we're gonna give participants a chance to really, think about some issues they care about, and how they might apply those principles to things that they really want to make progress on. So that's going to be at 2:45 at Trailhead. So why not just come out to the documentary and then head over to the workshop?
Can't think of a reason.
I can't either.
Right?
I don't know.
Well, let's give these guys a round of applause.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you guys for showing up.
One other shameless plug. After Luke's workshop is also the Hackfort closing party, and there will be food and beverage at that party too. Thank you guys so much. Gabe, if you're ready, we can get you set up here.